This is Bishop Michael Curry, and you're listening to The Way of Love.
Welcome to the Way of Love podcast with Bishop Michael Curry, a podcast about following Jesus and changing the world. I'm your host, Sandy Milien. In this episode, Bishop Curry talks with the Very Rev. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. This audio comes from the 2020 International Black Clergy Conference, presented by the Episcopal Church's Office of Black Ministries. To worship on the Way of Love is to gather in community weekly, to thank, praise, and dwell with God. Dean Brown Douglas and Bishop Curry discuss their understanding of being Black Episcopalians and the lessons that the whole church can learn from the earliest days of Black church through the present day.
We have got to learn from Jesus of Nazareth, who did not internalize the oppression of the Roman Empire. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Jesus went back into his heritage and discovered how God would lead him. And that's how his way would set folk free. I am convinced that if we take this gospel seriously, it will really set us free and help us to become instruments of God setting us free.
As we explore our relationships with God, as we draw closer to God, we will find ourselves in turn drawing closer to each other.
So, Bishop Curry, I'm not sure what time of day we will actually be holding this conversation in terms of when it is seen, but I can say to you today, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning.
And it is so good, as always, to be brought into conversation with you.
And likewise with you.
Thank you. So I thank the Office of Black Ministries for making this opportunity available to us. Let's jump into this conversation, and I want to begin this conversation by really talking about what it means for us to be not simply church, but Black church. Inasmuch as we think of church as being about a people called out, right, by God to be in some way a manifestation of God's work in the world, which means then being a manifestation of God's work where God is moving us toward God's just future, or as Martin Luther King would say, and as you in the presiding bishop's office are saying, the beloved community, or as Jesus called it, the kingdom of God, that our task as church is to be that sort of manifestation of that work in the world. So my question then becomes, given our history as a Black church that emerged out of the hush harbors of slavery, informed by our African religious tradition that allowed us to understand that the religion of our slaveholders, where, as Frederick Douglass said, right, where the church bell rang in together with the auctioneer's bell, slave auctioneer's bell, that tradition of which we are a part, that allowed us to understand that the slaveholders' religion and the religion that is reflected in Jesus Christ weren't the same.
Right.
Given all of that, I want us to begin to talk about what difference being Black means to being church. What does it mean to be Black church? Because it has to mean something different than simply how indeed we have been blessed by Ebony Grace. It has to mean something different than that. And so I first want to ask, what difference does it make for who we are on the public square?
Yeah.
In a time that's not unlike a time 50 years ago, when during the Black Power movement, and we had leaders like Nathan Wright, right, to John Burgess, who began to talk about what it meant to be Black church in relationship to the Black Power movement and what we could learn from them. What does it mean now in this context of BLM? What can we learn from them about being Black church?
You know, I think what we can learn from Black Lives Matter movement, from the movements that are emerging among the young, which is always where the movements actually happen. I mean, that historically that's been the case. I mean, Dr. King was in his 30s when he died. Jesus of Nazareth himself was 33 when he was crucified. So there is something about people like me at 67. We like to reflect on the past. Folk who are young actually like to change the future. So there's something there, I think. But I do think what the framework for what we as church can learn from Black Lives Matter and from the movements that are emerging now is what the Bible means when in the prologue of John's gospel, it says of the coming of Jesus into the world, it says, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We must continually ask ourselves the question, how is the word, the eternal word of God, being translated into the language of time, into the language of our situation, into the language of our condition? How is the word of God taking flesh and dwelling among us, full of grace and truth? And how is that happening in BLM? How is that happening when there were on the protest in the streets? How is that happening when our young are yearning for justice and righteousness and for love? They actually are claiming it. What can we learn? I think they're teaching us. So going back to the question you were asking in part is Black church. I want to suggest that the Black church today has a heritage that can be translated into the word becoming flesh and dwelling among us right now. Let me tell you quickly what I mean.
Yeah.
By that, and I don't mean just kind of the sentimentality of the 150th anniversary or something like that. I mean, that's important, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is the deep origin of the historic Black church. Go back to E. Franklin Frazier, the Black church, or the Negro church in America.
He said we were a nation within a nation.
Say it again.
He said we were a nation within a nation as Black.
That's exactly right. And he recognized that the unique reality of the Black church, or the Negro church, as he was calling it in his time, was that it had 2 points of origin, 3 actually. One, its African religious traditions, the various traditions that were brought together on those slave ships. 2, the linking of those traditions and the folk with Christianity, and a version of Christianity that was very often perverted and distorted the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, they tried to leave him out as much as they could anyway, because he was not helpful to the cause of enslaving folk. Never has been and never will be. But anyway, but that you had that coming together, and then you had the 2 historic origins of the actual church itself. You had the institutional church up north, where you had some freed Blacks, Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, Peter Williams, Varick, you can go through those lists of folk in Philadelphia and New York and Boston and those folk. So you had the institutional church, but then you had the invisible institution, which is really Mama. And that was the church that happened among slaves in this country, where they went to the Episcopal Church during the day with Massa and Missy. I mean, because that's what they had to do. And so they sat in the back, or they sat on the wagons or whatever. And a lot of those churches Episcopalians were one of the largest slave owners in the South. And so they went to church, right? And then they would come back, and Sunday was usually a day of rest for folk. And at Sunday evening, they would steal away to Jesus. Steal away Jesus. I ain't got time to stay here. They would steal away to Jesus. And sometimes that meant somebody was escaping. Sometimes that meant Harriet Tubman was in the neighborhood and it's time for y'all to make a move, time to decide. And sometimes that meant say, we can't escape right now, but we can go to our own church. And they went and had their own church, that invisible, and that's what he calls the invisible institution. That is the origin of the real Black church. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And there that they declared their freedom in spite of what they had been told in the catechisms that distorted Christianity, in spite of what they had heard Sunday morning. It was there. Howard Thurman has that wonderful story where he talks about his ancestors, his grandmother, talking about the ancestors, and some old preacher who used to preach in that invisible institution. Whatever it was he was talking about, he always ended his sermon by saying, "You are not niggers. You are not slaves. You are the children of God." Dean, that's the word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. That is the model and the paradigm for the Black church that the Black church can offer to Black and brown and indigenous communities, that we can offer to the whole church to discover you are not creatures of this word. You are not what this world tries to make you out to be. You are the children of God. Live like the children of God. Walk like, you see what I'm saying? That's the heritage. Okay, I'm sorry.
So no. Preach. But so, okay, let's take that, right? Okay. And that, yes, that's a part of the African religious heritage that is informing them that, they knew, as I always say, that while their enslavers may have introduced them to Christianity, it didn't introduce them to God. And so they knew the God that knew them in freedom and that created them to be free, and that God came with them across the Middle Passage. So they understood that they were not meant to be slaves, that they were not created to be slaves. They knew that they were created free, and that God knew them in freedom, and they knew that God in freedom. So that was that thing that helped them resist any notion that they were ever created to be enslaved. However, even even as they understood that freedom was not simply something that they set on, because that freedom, while yes, they went back and they prayed and et cetera, and they were able to have that internal sense of self, that they were not slaves, but that invisible institution also gave birth to Nat Turner, to Denmark Vesey, to Prosser, right? The people to Henry Highland Garnett, who said that you have a moral obligation. You have a moral obligation to fight for your freedom, to go out there. It gave birth to David Walker, right? And David Walker's appeal, even as it gave birth to Maria Stewart. You got a moral obligation, Henry Highland Garnett said. So now here's the thing. So let's bring this to where we are, Bishop Curry. So how is it that, BLM looks at us and they say, now what makes you as Black church, as Black people in that 90% white church, what makes you any more credible to us and then that wider church? What is it about you? Because they're looking at the Christian church and they're saying, whoa, they're saying what Frederick Douglass said about the Christian church in his time. They're saying what Vincent Harding said about American Christianity in his time. They're saying, whoa, this church is indeed not church. And so what is it about us being Black that how come BLM can say that to us? How is it that we can, what difference does it make that we have that heritage that you're talking about? A heritage not of the invisible institution that gave birth to Henry Highland Garnett and others. What difference does that make? And how do we live that out onto the public square?
That's where, and I'm going to go back to that text, the word must become flesh and dwell among us.
What's it look like?
It is to say the church today must become an incarnational institution in the community where it dwells, in the community in which we live. And it must do that by becoming a part of that community. It must do that by becoming a part of the issues of that community. I mean, I'm a bishop now, so I'm not a parish priest anymore. When I was in Baltimore, we became part of part of the community organization that was involved in issues in our Harlem Park, Lafayette Square neighborhood community. And we became very involved with that, involved in bringing the churches, the religious community that was in West Baltimore, in that part of West Baltimore. Did the same thing in Lincoln Heights and the same thing in Winston-Salem when it was there. But the point was the church must become incarnate in the community where it is. It must work on behalf selflessly on behalf of the good and the welfare of that community. It must do the Jeremiah thing and work on behalf of the welfare of the city, because in the welfare of the city is our own welfare. When the church does that, you see, then Black Lives Matter is part of that work. We're participating with them in that work in some way, shape, manner, or form. And so it may be, I'll give you an example, not from Black Lives Matter, but from, I'm getting old now, North Dakota.
Yeah, you are, but I'm not.
Yes, my young sister. Yes. The Sioux, the pipeline.
Oh, yeah. In South Dakota. In South Dakota.
Standing Rock.
Standing Rock.
That the indigenous community, the Sioux Nation, made a decision that they were going to resist having a pipeline built on their sacred burial lands, and also crossing the river that was the source of water for their community. They knew that they were being exploited, and they rose up, and the Sioux Nation organized that. And that whole, it's actually gained some success. It's taken forever. It's had to go through the courts, but it's actually gained some success. They lost some, won some. It's a new civil rights struggle for indigenous folk. The church, I remember when I went to Standing Rock, I went and celebrated Eucharist at the Episcopal Church, right on the reservation itself. Mm-hmm. The Episcopalians, the folk of that church, were a part of that whole movement. Father John Floberg and all the other folk who were involved, they were all involved. And what they did was, the old folk couldn't get out and march, because when we were at the camp, at the Standing Rock camp, those were young folk. And they were riding horses bareback. They would do, I remember they would come running through the camp, or riding through the camp bareback and stuff. And I said, ain't no old folk gonna be able to do that. The young ones got to do that. But you know what the folk at the church did? They made sandwiches. They served as chaplains. They served as support and advisors. They were a part of the movement. They couldn't do what they could do when they were in their 20s, but they could do something now in their 70s. And they were doing it. That may sometimes be the role of the church. Not always to take the lead, because we may not have the energy to do that, but to take our part, whatever that happens to be. And when we do that, then they don't ask anymore, what use are you? When the word becomes flesh, folk will see it and they'll know and understand. People know who William Barber is. Right. People in the communities know about the Poor People Campaign. They know. They don't ask, does that have any relevance? Now, you see them getting that?
I'm sorry. No, I do. So, because that's a critique. If they've got to ask that question, where are you? Then that's a critique on us. And I often say that, to call ourselves church is aspirational. And so that's a critique on us. And maybe as well, to call ourselves Black church is aspirational. Jim Cone said some 50 years ago that to be Black is to be Christian, and to be Christian is to be Black. And he meant that beyond the demographic and beyond the ethnicity and race, right? Melanin. He meant that in terms of our mission and our commitment, right? And so it's an indictment upon us when someone like BLM or anybody else can say, so, where's the church? Or can look at those of us who are blessed with ebony grace and say, so where's the Black church? So, but I have this other question. When you talk about, and I agree with you that we don't always have to take the lead. We have to listen. We have to be proximate, and we have to learn from those people who are on the ground. Martin Luther King said that instead of being a thermometer, the church needs to be the thermostat, right? It needs to set, in essence, the temperature where we got to get to. It needs to lead the way of where we have to go. And this is the way in which I say, we're on the other side by the time this plays. We're on the other side of an election, right? And so we heard in so many respects, people, well, we can't be partisan. We can't do this. Well, you know what? But no matter what election, no matter what time, no matter who the candidates are, there's one thing that holds steady, And that is our values and to which we are accountable, God's just future. And if that holds steady, then we are in some ways to always act in all times and in all places as the thermostat, right? As the one setting the bar, leading the way. We tell people, vote your values, live our values, live as if, live into the just future that God has promised for us all, and get us there so that sometimes, and let's say, while we listen contextually to the people, but we set a bar. How to be Black in church? My goodness, that's what it means to be Black in church. So how have we failed, or not how we've done it. How have we failed in not doing that? I think of that, Bishop Curry, in relationship to this call to defund the police, right? That forget the word defund. That should have been our call. We should have led the way in talking about the creation of just communities, not about policing communities, but about safe communities. And safety means just communities. Where have we been? These communities are disproportionately Black communities, and they're living in unsafe conditions where people are policing them. We should have been talking about community responders and not police, that everything doesn't need a police. It shouldn't have taken BLM, and then they talk about defunding and nobody wants to talk about how are we setting the thermostat? Where are we in all of this? Where should we be in all of this?
I think there's a holistic approach to it. I really do, because I think every church congregation ought to be a place that doesn't, now again, I'm talking beyond the pandemic, when we're not in the pandemic right now, ought to be a place that is a beehive of community uplift, which is to say, if a church building is just sitting there during the week and opening up on Sunday for folk to come and worship, and that, have Sunday school, and that's about it, then it's not doing its work. It is not following in the footsteps of Jesus of Nazareth, who walked the sandy land of Palestine. And so we must, but that's what I mean by the word must become flesh. It's got to be embodied. We need to be 7-day-a-week churches. We need to be churches that are educating children when they get off from school. We need to be churches that are providing the context for children to grow and develop and nurture into all that God intends for them to be. We need to be churches that are involved with other churches and religious communities in our neighborhood and neighborhood associations for the advancement and well-being of our neighborhoods and that kind of thing. We need to be involved. When we were part of Build, we started by trying to move a liquor store from across the street from the Pender Hughes School, because the little kindergarten children had to come out of the school. That was our first action that Build helped us organize. And it took forever to get the liquor authorities to rezone so that children coming out of kindergarten wouldn't have to look at a liquor store and look at folk dealing drugs at that liquor store, because that's what was really going on there. So that was the beginning, but they helped us organize with other religious communities. And this was Black and white. This was ecumenical. This was interfaith across the spectrum. And we began advocating for a living wage for the hotel workers who were, you see what I'm getting at? My point is, you can work through the community organizing. You do the service and ministry and work in the community, and you do it in the name of Jesus of Nazareth. You don't hide who you are. Don't put that light under a bushel. Be who you are. Evangelism and social justice must walk together hand in hand. You see them getting that witness to this gospel, but do it not just with words, but with deeds. A 7-day-a-week church. You see what I'm getting at? And that will move you to engaging living wage. That will move you to engaging poverty in America. See, nobody on the political campaign can talk. They have to talk about the middle class.
Right.
They talk about poor people and run for political office in this country. So that's okay. Everybody understand that's how the game is played, because you got to get in office before you can do something.
But we have to talk about poor people.
But we can, exactly.
Because that's where Jesus was, right?
Exactly.
So Jesus was with those the only way. Jesus made clear, the cross makes clear. I always say, Bishop Curry, that we are, and I agree with you that we have to be incarnate, because we are a faith tradition with an incarnate God at the center and a cross, a daggone cross. You talk about King and Jesus dying in their 30s. They didn't die because of bad health. They died, and they didn't die because they prayed too much. They were crucified. They were crucified because they held themselves accountable to God's just future, and they embodied that, right? And that's and the world said no to that, and the world killed them and crucified them for that. And so, but they crucified them because in holding themselves accountable, they knew that the way to that just future was from those people who are on the most underside of it, the poor, the outcasts, the marginalized, the utter marginalized. And that's the only way. When they begin to talk about justice, then we know we're on the way to justice. And so you were right that the politicians may not talk about the poor, but if we're going to be church, if we have to talk about the poor, and we have to hold them accountable. And guess who else we got to hold accountable? We got to hold ourselves accountable to that, right? So otherwise we aren't being church. I want to talk. I know we're supposed to. This is an international conference. I want to say something about us being in the diaspora as well, and what that means, what Blackness means, what's our accountability one to another. I'm just always struck by the fact, and I've heard you speak on this sometimes, that the way in which, here we are people who know what it means to be oppressed. We know what it means to have the quote unquote gospel used as a weapon against us. Right? We know what that means. We know what it means to have a religion that terrorizes, right? We know what that means. Yet, sometimes, we do that which was done to us. How, and to me, that's not simply betraying what it means to be Christian, it's betraying what it means to be Black. And if to be Black is to be Christian, and to be Christian is to be Black. What are the ways in which we have betrayed our very Blackness?
We have, and I think this is universal. We have, and this is a dynamic of oppression and a dynamic of oppression that the oppressed, sometimes just as a survival mechanism, internalizes the oppression itself, and very often becomes a new oppressor of the self. I remember, and I didn't realize how universal this dynamic was. I read Franz Fanon and The Wretched of the Earth. I mean, I read that, but I didn't realize how much he was right. I mean, he was talking about folk in Algeria and their struggle against French colonialism. And he was a psychiatrist. And so he understood how folk internalized these structures. And I remember reading that in college and saying, wow, that's deep. I didn't realize how powerful it was until I had been, I was a priest at St. James, Baltimore, and went up, Bishop Peter Fenty, who's now Bishop Fenty, in Toronto, invited me up to preach at St. Paul's it was Heritage Day, Heritage Month, which is like Black History Month here, is Heritage Month there. And I debated about the sermon because I was going to talk about, how we have internalized, but I wasn't sure, did my experience in the United States, did it apply in Canada to folk of the African diaspora who came through the Caribbean, through the West Indies for the most part? And I wasn't sure, but I took a gamble. I said, I'm going to take a gamble at it. And I said, I remember when I was a little boy, and one of my fondest memories was Saturday night when my mama was doing my sister's hair. And they made them hot combs. Y'all remember those hot combs?
I do.
Work with that Nigerian natural.
And burn your ear.
Yeah, and burn it, kids' ear. Oh yeah, and the little girl be hollering and screaming. That's why Black women are so tough. They've toughened them up. That's part of the matriculation of Black women.
That's why I cut my hair.
I know, exactly. And as I was telling that story, folk were cracking up. I realized, and I told them we had this thing in Buffalo that it was a relaxer.
Yep.
And it was called Concoline, and they had a jingle on the black radio station. If your hair is good and nappy, Concoline will make you happy. I mean, that was the internal.
With that.
You remember that stuff? Well, I told that story in Toronto, Canada, among folk from the diaspora, mostly from the Caribbean, the West Indies. They knew exactly what I was talking about. I've told that story in England. They know exactly. I've told that story in Africa. They know exactly what. This was the dynamic of internalizing the oppression yourself and then beginning to live out of that existence and that way instead out of the way of Jesus of Nazareth, who will set you free and will set us all free. You see, that's what, so I think one thing we have got to learn from Jesus of Nazareth, who did not internalize the oppression of the Roman Empire. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Jesus went back into his heritage and discovered how God would lead him. And that's how his way would set folk free. I am convinced that if we take this gospel seriously, it will really set us free and help us to become instruments of God setting us free. Paul says it in Galatians, for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand fast and do not accept the yoke of slavery again. I mean, I really do believe that the real gospel, I'm not just talking about an airy-fairy kind of up there somewhere. I'm talking about the real deal, will actually show us the way for us to be free and for us to be agents of setting other folk free, no matter who they are, no matter what their color. That's the freedom, the joyful liberty of the children of God, as St. Paul said.
Is your church a beehive of activity in your community? If it's not, what could you do to make it so?
So I so agree with that, and you know me.
I know. Yes, I knew you're coming back with something.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I believe that. I believe that the gospel will set us free. Lord knows, I believe that. I believe that we should not, again, as Paul said, ever be again tethered by the yoke of slavery. I believe that. Now it's sort of like my son said to me, my 27-year-old 6-foot lock-wearing son, he said, I know Christ is black. I believe that. And I believe God's on the side of the oppressed. But what difference is that making to us now? So, right. So I would have asked, I believe all that. But what does that look like? What difference does it make? Because here's the thing. When we talk about this internalized oppression, the Black Power movement, one of the things that they focus on was self-love, right? I get that. But it was if we talk about it as this sort of revolutionary, if we will, transformative self-love, how does this sort of internalized oppression, if you will, manifest itself not simply in terms of our ability to love who we are and all of our Blackness, but to love, if Black Lives Matter, all Black lives. So we internalize this oppression in as much as we foster and nurture sexism and patriarchalism, in as much within the diaspora, in as much as we internalize and manifest LGBTQ terrorism, because homophobia, okay, no, it's more than that, it's terrorism, under the name of God, and it's sexism under the name of God. And so how did that, to me, if we want to dig deep about internalized oppression, because here's the thing that Jesus did, and you write about Jesus, right? That Jesus let go of anything, the privileges that he had. He let go of anything that would keep him from manifesting God's more just future, and that would keep him from truly being on the side of those who were most. He let it go, right? He let go of the privilege of his maleness. He let go of the privilege of his Jewishness. He let go of even the privilege of his divinity, because he died on that daggone cross. And so, what is it we got to let go of? And when I'm talking about internalized oppression, I know, I know the thing about, trying to get light, bright, and almost white and all that kind of stuff, and straightening your hair and getting your ears burned to the crisp, trying people straighten your hair. I know about that, but I also know about patriarchalism.
Yeah.
Sexism. I also know about LGBTQ terrorism. And that, to me, for Black people, is a sin, and it's internalized oppression.
Yes. You begin to act it out and act the way of the oppression that you've experienced. You, in turn, do it on somebody else. I want to suggest that the way you do that, again, it's the Jesus way. You walk the other way. You turn the other cheek. By that, now, I'm not talking about turning the other cheek and letting somebody else beat you up. No. I'm saying you take that negative oppression and you turn it into a positive attribute. You see what I mean? That not only tries to set you free, but sets others free. That you begin to understand that, wait a minute. One of the things that has been a change for me, a growing edge for me, was I always grew up passionately committed to the equality of Black folk. I grew up, my daddy used to say God didn't make anybody to be under anybody's foot. And at that time, he was talking about us. And, that was it. What I began to realize as the years went on, I said, wait a minute, if I don't want anybody's foot on me and my folk, then I don't want anybody's foot on anybody else. I don't care who they are. And that means LGBTQ folks. That means I just was on a call yesterday about the Dalit folk of India and their struggle. And I'm gonna make a video about it. To support their struggle. I said, because injustice to anybody is a threat to justice for everybody, as Dr. King taught us a long time ago. And that's how you see what I mean? That's how you turn the other cheek, go the second mile. You take what was meant to be oppression for you, and you turn that, you do what Gandhi called moral jujitsu. You take that negative energy and you turn it into something positive, not just for yourself, but you turn it into something positive for others, and you participate in setting other folk free. And you join with them in their struggle. You go to Standing Rock with the Sioux Nation. You stand with the Dalit, and you stand at the border with folk coming across and trying to immigrate. You stand with the refugee. You stand with LGBTQ folk. You stand with Muslims who are being put down in this country by folk who are supposed to be Christian. You see what I'm saying? You join with people of goodwill, and y'all stand for good and righteousness. That's what love does. See, love ain't love if it's just in the clouds. You knew I was going to get to love.
I knew, because I was going to let you know. I was going to ask you about that.
You asked me about that? Yeah, love always takes form, takes flesh, and lives. You remember that movie, My Fair Lady? At that song, one of the songs, the woman says to the man, she said, "Don't talk of love, show me. Love, you got to show it. You got to live it and do it. And as you do it, you will become it."
And so, see, I love that. Now I was gonna let you go there, because I was gonna ask you. Right? Yeah. I was gonna ask you. I see our time going, so I gotta ask this. This will be a good wrap up about Black love. And here's what
you read about that. You're the one to write about that now.
Well, but you know about that now, because here's the thing with Black love, and you know this. Let's talk about that. With our mamas and our daddies and our grandmamas, they loved us and all that, hug, and they love us, and they told us that Jesus loved us, and that that they affirmed us for who we were and all that kind of stuff. But we also know that Black love meant, right? Sometimes we could get in trouble for this, because you can't do this today. But sometimes Black love meant go out there and get that switch off that tree. True. And bring it on back in here into me. Now you can't do that today, but we know you and I grew up that Black love, or my mother used to say to me,
"Don't come back with no twig."
Right, don't come back with no twig, because then if you did that, you was really in trouble. Yeah. You had to come back with that long thing that stung when it hit you. Or my mother used to say, "Don't you roll your eyes at me, girl." And my mother would say, "I brought you into this world, and I'll take you out of it."
That's right.
Now that's true. Black love. Black love calls you out. Yeah. Black love doesn't suffer fools lightly. Black love doesn't stand for wrong. It'll call you out, and it'll call you out in a hard way. Black love is Malcolm X saying, you know, how can you Black folks be Christian? That's Black love. Now, tell me about Black love. How does that function in our diaspora? How does that function in our Black church? I want to talk about Black love.
Wow. You know, I saw it. There was remember when Kamala Harris was debating with Mike Pence? Mm-hmm. And there are several moments, incredible moments. I mean, when that sister kept saying, I'm talking. I said, oh, Lord. But there was a moment, I saw somebody put it on social media where she had that look. She was looking at him, and somebody in the caption wrote, that's the same look your mama gave you when she knew you was lying, and she let you just keep talking and hang yourself. That's the Black love you talk about.
That's right.
It is the genius of compelling truth.
Like the compelling truth.
Compelling truth. And sometimes letting you hang yourself with the lie, but compelling truth. That is the genius. I mean, it really is. That love is not anything goes.
Yeah.
It's about reaching for the highest, the best. It's the noblest. It is Langston Hughes's poem From Mother to Son. I'm still climbing. I'm still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So don't you sit down, boy. Don't you sit down because you're kind of tired. That's the kind of love that's what will lift you up and liberate you. It may hurt while you have to do it because you got to stand up. And it may hurt, and that's okay. But it's a hurt that can heal in the long run. Because the motive is good. The motive is
love. Right.
Love. It's to lift you above the mud and the mire and the muck. You are not niggers. You are not slaves.
And don't act like
you are not X, Y, Z, whatever this world calls you. You are the children of God. Stand up like that. Stand up, lift up your heads, and walk with dignity.
And act like it. Just because we're children of God doesn't mean that we're going to act like children of God. And that, you know, when I'm thinking about Black love too, yes, it's hard, it's critiquing, it's truth. And that's the kind of love we need to speak to ourselves, right? Yeah. As a quote unquote Black church, as the African diaspora, we got to say, oh no, you can't do that.
That ain't gonna work. No, right. Exactly.
Right. You can't do that. And we got to be hard about that, the way our parents are, because we know that they were hard and our grandmamas were hard on us because they knew the world that we had to navigate, and they knew that it was the only way that we would survive, stay alive, and that we could ever become free. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about, you know, Bishop Curry, Black love, and how that's an indicting kind of love. And it's hard and it hurts, and you call people out, but you do it out of love. So okay, I gotta say one more thing, and then I promise we're gonna end this, because I know
right. So I don't know how they're gonna edit this, but anyway.
I know I could keep going, but here we are.
Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead.
In this, in our 90-some% white church, you know, and we've got a Black PB, Lord Jesus. We've got these 5 Black female bishops.
Yeah.
We've got. Did you see the slate in Chicago? I don't know when this is going to show, but you know, there might be a bishop by then. But did you see that slate?
I didn't double take. I just said, wait a minute, am I reading? Wait a minute. I know.
4 people of blessed with ebony grace.
Yeah.
On that slate. And okay, I'll indict myself. We've got a Black dean of an Episcopal seminary that ain't never happened in the history of
the church.
I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, but here's
she's a she.
Huh?
And she's a she.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like, wow, this is deep.
Right.
Serious.
So here's the thing, and you and I've had these conversations before, that this must matter for something other than being first, right? And
If
so
you're first and last, then it doesn't matter.
it don't matter. So what difference does our Black presence and should our Black presence make in this church right now? What does it mean? Let's go back to where you started. What does it mean to be a nation within this church when our time is done? And people shouldn't have to look up to say, oh yeah, we had them first Black people that came through there then. When our time is done, how should this church be made different and become a little bit closer to what it means to be church because of our Black presence?
Right. I really do believe. Remember, there's a tape of Walter Dennis.
That's what haunts me.
Or I don't remember, it was before he died, obviously, but and I don't know if it was his last sermon, but I remember Black Ministries produced it. And in that tape, he said, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, he said, did the office that you hold, did you ennoble it? Did you call it back to its origins? Did you make it great by helping the church to become what Jesus meant for it to be?
Mm-hmm.
That is your mission. That is your task. And I really do believe that people like you and people like me and people like folk who are at this conference, who are leaders of color, who are Black leaders, that we have a moral duty and a moral obligation to make sure that we've done everything we can to make the church and the world of which we are a part something closer to God's dream, to the beloved community, whereas the old slaves used to say there's plenty good room for all of God's children. And we must take every opportunity we can and must be dedicated to that mission wherever we are and wherever we have opportunity. I said something to somebody, this is an interview I was doing, and they were asking me about the royal wedding. And they said, what did your heritage have to do with that? I said, well, one, just me being there did something. I mean, it's like, I'm obviously Black, ain't no doubt about that. So yeah, I mean, that's obvious. I said, but the thing that moved me most deeply was that I had an opportunity to be present. And the royal family was most gracious. They really were. But to be present at what once was the seat of the very empire that enslaved my folk. And I don't say that to hurt or harm anybody. I don't mean it that way. That was just a fact.
Yeah, it's what it is.
The one thing that I could do, was to carry the message my ancestors taught me when they used to quote Booker T. Washington and said, don't let anybody drag you so low as to hate them. That's why I preached that sermon about love. But the other thing I was able to do, and this is what we must always do, I was able to conjure up the slave ancestors and to quote one of their songs at the center of power in the world. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. Their wisdom, the insight of those slaves, of those Africans, was brought to bear in the 21st century moment, and 2 billion people heard something about our African ancestors and their wisdom. That's, you take whatever opportunity you have to bring the good and the wisdom of that heritage to bear on the present moment in which you live. And then you will have done your job.
Yeah. I agree. And this sense of accountability, because we're stepping into a legacy. And it was a legacy of people, for me say this before, of a people who fought for freedom, even when they knew that the freedom they were fighting for was a freedom that they would never, ever see.
They wouldn't see.
But they fought for that freedom anyhow.
Yes.
Because they believed in the freedom that was the justice of God. And because they fought for that freedom, Bishop Curry,
yes,
you and I are sitting here today as dean, as PB, as nominally free Black people.
Nominally, but yeah.
Yeah, nominally.
You're right.
Because we have yet to get to that place.
Yes.
Where we are seeing the freedom that is the justice of God. And we won't get there.
Right.
Until those people on the most that aren't sitting where we're sitting.
Yes.
That don't have, that we aren't accountable to this institution. I keep saying to myself, I'm not accountable to this institution that is the Episcopal Church. I'm accountable to God's just future. And that means that I am accountable to the very, very, very least of these. And I am accountable to those people who have gone before me to fight for a freedom that they never, ever experienced. And so if I'm going to make a difference in the time that I have to live on this earth. And make a difference in this window of opportunity that I've been given by the universe because of the folks who came before me. Then it seems to me that difference that I must make is the difference of bringing us a little bit closer.
A little bit closer. Yes. Yes.
Staying on the arc that bends toward justice.
Yes.
And bringing us a little bit closer to where that arc bends.
Yes.
And if I'm not doing that, it seems that's right. I've betrayed what it means to be Christian. I've betrayed what it means to be Black, because it ain't about me.
Nope.
It's about a legacy that talks about freedom.
Yeah, it's the movement.
It's a movement. That's right. Movement. And that's what haunts me. And I hope to me, that's what has to haunt, not in a bad way, but haunt to inspire all of us who are in this diaspora of people blessed with ebony grace, because to be in this diaspora of people blessed with ebony grace means more than simply being blessed with ebony grace. It means living into a legacy of people who are on the arc that bent toward freedom. Yeah.
You've been blessed. You are meant to bless.
There you go. And I've been blessed in this conversation today. Thank you, Bishop Curry.
Oh, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. I always go back to seminary when I sit and talk with you.
Oh, I go back to church.
I learned something. I'm telling you.
I go back to church. I tell you, there are some folks, I believe in the gospel, but you really believe in the gospel. Every time I talk to you, I am indicted by the gospel. And so let our church be indicted by the gospel. So every time I talk to you, I wither and say, oh my goodness.
Just stop. I love you, sister. You're awesome.
I love you much. I love you much. Take care.
You too, man.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of The Way of Love with Bishop Michael Curry. If you'd like to learn more about Dean Kelly Brown Douglas, visit the Episcopal Church Divinity School website at utsnyc.edu. If you'd like to know more about the Office of Black Ministries, visit iam.ec/Black Ministries. As always, you can learn more about Bishop Curry and the Way of Love, including how to create your own personal rule of life at episcopalchurch.org. Thanks this week to Dean Kelly Brown Douglas, the Office of Black Ministries, and the International Black Clergy Conference, Bishop Curry, Nancy Davidge, Jerusalem Greer, Chris Sycamore, Jeremy Tackett, and Scott Van Pletzenrand. I'm Sandy Milien, and I'll see you next time on The Way of Love.
The way of Jesus is the way of love, and the way of love can change the world.